I must say I'm delighted to join you on a subject which has been very close to my heart for the past 50 years. As you know, I've been involved in development activities. So I'm really delighted to be joining you this evening in France, and of course, just around noontime in New York. Thank you very much for making me part of this event to talk about development activities in the past several decades and about the rights of the present generation and so on and so forth. Now we start with Stockholm 50, which took place 2 months ago in Stockholm, sort of brought back nostalgic memories of an event which at that time in 1972 was considered as a very, very bold attempt to discuss major issues related to the human environment. And that was the UN Conference on the Human Environment, as it was called. It was the first major conference on international environmental issues and marked a turning point in the development of international environmental discourse. This conference was attended by representatives of 113 countries, 19 intergovernmental organizations, and more than 400 NGOs. The level of representation in itself from all segments of society was considered phenomenal. The conference was thus widely recognized as the beginning of modern political and public awareness of global environmental problems. The agenda for the conference was immense, of course, touching on virtually all aspects of natural resource use, that is the earth, including the air, water, land, flora, and fauna, and especially natural ecosystems, and the capacity of the earth to produce vital renewable resources. But the focus, reflecting the concerns of the developed countries, which had proposed the conference, was meant to be on the threat to natural environment posed by economic growth and industrial pollution. Now, on the other hand, developing countries, most of which had become independent in the previous couple of decades, argued that poverty posed a greater threat to both the human welfare and the environment, and that economic growth in their case was not the problem, but the solution. So Stockholm 1972 thus marked, we can say, a polarization between the priorities of economic growth and environmental protection. And that dominated the debate between the rich and poor countries and between interest groups in each country. Nevertheless, after considerable debate, the meeting, that is the Stockholm Conference, agreed upon a declaration which had 26 principles concerning the environment and development. The Stockholm Principles, 26 of them, emphasize that natural resources must be safeguarded and that the Earth's capacity to produce renewable resources must be maintained. Other principles emphasized that non-renewable resources must be shared and not exhausted. Pollution must not exceed the environment's capacity to clean itself. And then it emphasized that development is needed to improve the environment and that developing countries needed assistance. Environment policy must not hamper development, it was said. So one of the seminal issues that emerged from the conference was the recognition of poverty alleviation for protecting the environment. The Indian Prime Minister, the then Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, the only other world leader to attend the conference in addition to the Swedish Prime Minister, in her seminal speech, she brought forward the connection between ecological management and poverty alleviation. She made a clear distinction between what she described as the pollution of affluence in the global north and the pollution of poverty in the global south. It may be recalled that one of the other major developments at Stockholm 1972 was creation of the UN Environment Program, which commemorated a couple of months ago, 50th anniversary of its founding. So Stockholm 1972 gave inspiration to continuing the process for reviewing and updating the development agenda. As a result, during the 1980s, a new political and development paradigm emerged, which appeared to reconcile the somewhat conflicting objectives. In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development, popularly known as the Brundtland Commission, named after the chairperson Gro Harlem Brundtland, the then Prime Minister of Norway, it submitted its report called Our Common Future. And it came to be known as the Brundtland Report. The report set out the concept of sustainable development as an integrated approach to policy and decision-making, in which environmental protection and long-term economic growth are seen not as incompatible, but as complementary. Indeed, mutually dependent. It emphasized that solving environmental problems requires resources which only economic growth can provide, while economic growth will falter if the human health and natural resources are damaged by environmental degradation. The aim of Brundtland Commission was to rally and unite countries, that is, developed and developing, to pursue sustainable development together. It emphasized the unity of environment and development by explaining that the environment is where we live, and development is we all do or need to do to improve our lot within that abode. The two are inseparable, they argued. The Brundtland Commission provided us the definition of sustainable development, which is very important in the context of the subject of our discussion. And the Brundtland Commission defined sustainable development. It is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. I repeat, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And I think that is the context in which we have to look at the situation today. And the Commission further clarified that sustainable development had three dimensions. One, of course, and the first one was environmental protection and sustainability. Second was economic growth or development that is viable. And the third was social equity or equality. It thus becomes evident that Stockholm 1972 set the process for evolution or development of the approaches that we needed to follow to improve our lot. Now, following the Brundtland Commission report, we had the UN Conference on Environment and Development, popularly known as the Earth Summit, or the Rio Conference, as it was held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, which gave us 27 principles to guide further development of our approaches. It emphasized, inter alia, that human beings are at the center of sustainable development concerns, and that people are entitled to productive and healthy life in harmony with nature. It clarified that nations have the right to exploit their resources, but without causing environmental damage beyond their borders. It emphasized that eradicating poverty and reducing disparities in living standards in different parts of the world were essential for achieving sustainable development. It also emphasized, as I said earlier, the 1972 Stockholm Conference set in motion the process for regularly visiting the Sustainable Development Progression, The Earth Summit in 1992 was followed by Rio Plus 10 and then Rio Plus 20, that's 20 years after the Earth Summit, which initiated the process for formulation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now we are more than 1/3 of the way into the 2030 Agenda. And I could talk about the status of implementation of the SDGs, which has been hampered by the onset of COVID-19, as we know. I would probably talk about this particular aspect at a different venue or event because of paucity of time. So we can say that 1972 initiated the process and thinking on developmental and environmental issues. Can we imagine where we would have been if there was no Stockholm 1972? In that context, 1972 was a shining light that has guided us through our journey over 5 decades. Now, the relationship between our common agenda, which is being pursued now, and the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals are at the core of our common agenda. The 2030 Agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, prosperity, and peace that seeks to realize the human rights of all and to achieve gender equality. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, are integrated and indivisible and balance the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, that is, economic, social, and environmental. The UN Secretary General, in his report on our common agenda, emphasized that many of the actions proposed in his report does seek to accelerate achievement of the goals, not least in the light of gaps and delays caused by COVID-19 pandemic. Actions already underway to achieve the goals will in turn be key for the implementation of the common agenda to ensure the rights of the future generations. So in our common agenda, the UN Secretary General emphasized that the social contract is at the center and that now is the time to renew the social contract. He stresses that solidarity with younger and future generations, and that's very important. Solidarity with younger and future generation is important, and that improved response to crisis is necessary, while stating that we are at an inflection point in history and that we face our biggest shared test since the Second World War. He emphasized that humanity faces a I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit lost. So while the agenda highlights that the coronavirus disease is upending our world, threatening our health, destroying economies and livelihoods, and deepening poverty and inequalities. And he further emphasized that conflicts continue to rage and worsen. The disastrous effects of changing climate, famine, floods, fires, and extreme heat threaten our very existence. For millions of people around the world, poverty, discrimination, violence, and exclusion are denying them their rights to the basic necessities of life, health, safety, vaccination against diseases, clean water to drink, food, or a seat in the classroom. Now, last year, on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, UN member states argued that our challenges are interconnected across borders and all other divides. These challenges can only be addressed by an equally interconnected response through reinvigorated multilateralism with the United Nations at the center of the efforts. And it was said the choice is ours to make, but we will not have the chance again. So that is why our common agenda is above all an agenda action designed to accelerate the implementation of existing agreements, including the Sustainable Development Goals. 5-6 points need emphasis here. First, this is the time to re-embrace global solidarity and find new ways to work together for the common good, and particularly for future generations. Second, now is the time to renew the social contract between governments and their people and within societies, so as to rebuild trust and embrace a comprehensive vision of human rights. People need to see results reflected in their daily lives. This must include the active and equal participation of women and girls, with whom no meaningful social contract is possible. Third, now is the time to end the infodemic, as the Secretary General described, plaguing our world by defending a common empirically backed consensus around facts, science, and knowledge. The war on science must end, he said. All policy and budget decisions should be backed by science and expertise. And in my opinion, there should be a very close interface between science and policy. And then fourth, it was considered that now is the time to correct a glaring blind spot in how we measure economic prosperity and progress. When profits come at the expense of people and our planet, we are left with an incomplete picture of the true cost of economic growth. As currently measured, gross domestic product fails to capture the human and environmental destruction of some business activities. So the Secretary General called for a new measure to complement gross domestic products so that people can gain a full understanding of the impacts of business activities and how we can and must do better to support people and other planet. Fifth was the emphasis that now is the time to think for the long term, to deliver more for young people and succeeding generations, and to be better prepared for the challenges ahead. Our common agenda includes recommendations for meaningful, diverse, and effective youth engagement, both within and outside the United Nations, including through better political representation and by transforming education. As you know, on 19th of September, the Secretary General will be holding a summit, which is called Transforming Education. So I'll be participating in that and can probably send you the report later. So in that context, the Secretary General is making proposals such as a repurposed trusteeship council, a futures lab, a declaration on future generations, and a special envoy to ensure that policy and budget decisions take into account their impact on future generations. Now, lastly, it was emphasized that now is the time for a stronger, more networked, and inclusive multilateral system anchored within the United Nations. Effective multilateralism depends on an effective United Nations, the Secretary General emphasized, one able to adapt to global challenges while living up to the purposes and principles of Charter. I think we have the responsibility to collectively craft a new culture of multilateralism, which is a culture of cooperation, of coordination, of making bold decisions to ensure that our global commons are managed, cared for, and preserved for future generations. That should include not only the conventional commons such as the oceans or the atmosphere, but health security, human dignity should also be considered as global commons. We need a multilateral system that's inclusive, efficient, relevant, accountable, and truly connected to people's needs and expectations. Now, the Secretary General in his report intends to ask a high-level advisory board led by former heads of state and government to identify global public goods and other areas of common interest where governance improvements are most needed, and to propose options for how this could be achieved. He also proposes to convene a summit of the future to forge a new global consensus on what our future should look like and what we can do to secure it. Now, I could go ahead and talk a lot more, but the question in my mind is, and I ask that question of all of you, the question we should ask ourselves, have we, the present generation, that's my generation, conducted development programs in a manner to meet or satisfy our needs? But as Brundtland Commission said, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And that's where I think the rights of the future generation come to play a part. I remind everybody of the definition of sustainable development given to us by the Brundtland Commission. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So, have we conducted ourselves in a manner that would not result in compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs? In that context, I should say that our generation, my generation, has failed the future generations. And let me conclude by reminding ourselves of a famous saying: we have not inherited the earth from our ancestors, we have borrowed it from our children. Let's keep that in mind, and I repeat, we have not inherited the earth from our ancestors, we have borrowed it from our children. With that, I thank you for your patience. And again, I'm delighted to have joined you on this occasion. Thank you very much.